Hi, friends. Before we start today's episode, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge some important truths. In this episode, we're focusing on themes of resistance, rebellion, and revolution. Within this discussion, we reference U.S. history, including slavery, Jim Crow, freedom riders, cross-racial allyship, and more. As four cis white people, we acknowledge that we have not been harmed by systemic racism and other systems of oppression, and the risk we carry from having these conversations is categorically different than the individuals and communities who were and still are experiencing harm. We also want to acknowledge that lived experience outweighs our experiences and knowledge. While we discuss involvement in resistance and rebellion, it's important for us to say from the beginning that Black, Indigenous, and minority-led organizers are doing this work daily, often without credit, without platforms, and without safety. Our goal is not to replace those voices, but to do our part in contributing to a broader discussion, because silence from those who've traditionally held the role of oppressor isn't neutral, it's harm. For those who are just entering this activism space, we're providing links in the show notes to resources that we have found useful. Still, we know we're going to get things wrong, and we welcome your feedback. Our inboxes are always open. With that said, here's our special episode. Welcome back to Romantasy Chaos HQ, the podcast. We are Avery and Xavier Harleston, healthcare professionals by day, romantasy theorists, and aspiring authors by night. Today, we have a special bonus episode for you, the first in what we are calling Romantasy Chaos Unmasked, where we explore deeper themes and meaning across an entire body of work. First, this is your warning. There will be spoilers for the entire Empyrean series. If you have not read all three books, it may be time to turn back. We're not rated E for everyone. Xavier has a degree in cussing, and he's not afraid to use it. And we do discuss any and all adult topics covered in these books. Today, we are joined by special guests, Kate and Rachel from the recently launched Deep Trope Podcast. So welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Thank you so much for having us, Avery and Xavier. Kate and I are both fans of romantasy, fantasy, and dark romance. And we worked together for years. And it wasn't until after a few cocktails at my wedding after party, I leaned across the table and said, "You need to read this little spicy fairy book that I'm taking on my honeymoon. I think you'll love it."
Tell me more.
And after that, it really spiraled from there. Our podcast was born over brunch, as all best ideas are. We would meet for brunch and just gab about our latest reads, and that would spiral into multiple day text threads about our theories. So we said, what would happen if we added a mic? Because we really wanted to offer deep dives for other romantasy fans and other members of this romantasy cult.
So if you don't have a book bestie to gab about over brunch, maybe we could be that for you. And if you do have a book bestie already, then just consider us part of your extended family, and let's get into it. Let's get really deep.
Well, that sounds super fun. And before we get started, we'd love to do a little round of rapid fire get to know you questions. We're not on a clock for this episode, but we're going to keep to that theme from our typical episodes of being compressed in time. So, are you ready?
We're ready.
Yes.
Okay. Which Empyrean book is your favorite?
Iron
Fourth
Flame.
Wing.
Really? Okay. What is your favorite quote from the series?
Mine is definitely "Lies are comforting, truth is painful" from Fourth Wing. Xaden says that, and I just find that to be very true.
My immediate reaction is, well, the fuck aware. But I think on a deeper level, it's "Let us be menaces," because I just love that line and like the girl power behind it.
I so feel that, because I do have a Roy Kent is my spirit animal t-shirt that could have fit. So well, the fuck aware definitely works.
We're actually recording on International Women's Day, so I'm going to go with brilliant fucking woman.
Oh, love that.
Good one. Good one.
If you could be any of the side characters, so really anyone besides Zane and Violet, who would you be?
I would definitely be Riddick. I think he's hilarious, and he's just kind of taking everything in stride. And also, we love a queer character. And I just think that his whole vibe is something that I would aspire to.
I would choose Imogen because I fingers crossed, ends up with my almost book boyfriend, Garrick, if and also she just has she's a badass. She has the best, she has two awesome powers, and she's also, even without the powers, strong in her own right.
And amazing hair.
Yes.
But with Riddick, like, I'm not sure I could handle all of the practical joking between him and Aetrim. Like, they talk about the itching powder in Onyx Storm, and I'm like, nope, I'm out.
True. For me, that feels like the whimsy, though. I mean, it can go a little bit far, I guess, but I like a little bit of whimsy and unexpectedness in your everyday life.
I was just thinking I might want to pick Adrian.
Didn't think about the dragons.
Yeah, I mean, like, my first instinct would be to say Sigale, because Garrick can be your book boyfriend, but I like Taryn a lot. He actually reminds me so much of Xavier's. Like, I have a type. The curmudgeonly old man. Like, I think it's sexy.
You've been with me for 20 years. It works for me.
You were kind of an old man before you were an old man.
I was an old man before I was an old man.
And I'm definitely the mean one in our relationship. So I feel like Sigale fits.
That makes sense to me.
Snarky.
I like this insight into your relationship. I like the unmasked version.
Yeah, behind the curtain.
Yeah. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But anyway, so that was super fun. Thank you. And so for everyone joining us, and today, instead of decoding a single epigraph, we are going to focus on the theme of resistance, rebellion, and revolution. So I want to start off by reading two epigraphs from Fourth Wing that are relevant to the theme of rebellion. So from chapter 5, knowing that I am in direct disagreement with General Melgren's orders, I'm officially objecting to the plan set forth in today's briefing. It is not this general's opinion that the children of the rebellion's leaders should be forced to witness their parents' executions. No child should watch their parent put to death. The Tirish Rebellion, an official brief for King Tori by General Lilith Sorrengail. And then from chapter 32, as for the 107 innocents, the children of the executed officers, they now carry what shall be known as the rebellion relic, transferred by the dragon who carried out the king's justice. And to show the mercy of our great king, they will all be conscripted into the prestigious Riders Quadrant at Basgiath, so they may prove their loyalty to our kingdom with their service or with their death. Addendum 4.2, the Treaty of Arisha. So I think this is so interesting. The rebellion relics really set the marked ones apart. And do you think that the fact that they got these relics really without their consent sets them up to inherit their parents' rebellion? Like, is this something that is fated for them? Like, or is there still an element of choice here?
I think this is such an interesting question. Because yes, of course, they have this identifiable mark on their bodies, and they're walking around the world being raised as the other and hated and distrusted by so many Navarians. And they're raised within this society that's executed their parents. So I think naturally they're going to be inclined to want to fight back against those in power. But I guess this is the nature versus nurture argument, right? Fated, I don't know if I think fated, because I think they still have a choice in their response. But I think all the circumstances are in place to lead them to be the resistance. And also, they're very likely, most of them, raised to already know the truth about Venin, at least from when they were younger, right? I'm sure their parents shared that with them. So I don't know if fated's the right word, but I know that you have a theory around Coda that I think offers a totally different perspective here.
I think the generational trauma that this creates, really sets up revolution more than resistance, or rebellion more than resistance, right? When I think about resistance, you stop resisting when the pain stops, right? Rebellion is about change. Revolution is about, complete system change. Watching your parents die means this pain's never going to stop, right? Like, you're never going to get past that. So it is much more of a rebellion. And we do really see this potential that Coda knew what he was doing, right? And that Coda is now somehow bonded to the marked ones, that there is a magic connection between Coda, who we think is a rebellion asset and really wants to fight the Venin and do everything he can to ensure that the Empyrean survives. Marking these children not only we believe makes them more powerful, but sets up this condition that they can't hide, that they're going to have to be, part of the other and part of a fight.
And I think it's interesting too, because the relic, again, there was no, as with most things for children, when you are a child, your ability to consent to what happens to you is limited. Adults make decisions for you. And I think it's different when you're talking about someone like Zayden, who this happened when he was 17, versus Julianne, who was not even born yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there's a difference in relic size. So Zayden has the biggest one, and then like Garrick is the second biggest. And is that based on age? Is it based on the amount that they've already been bought into this idea before the relic was transferred? And if so, we know that Julianne was not even born when the relic was transferred, but I'm assuming there are other younger children who probably were too young to really know what was happening, understand what was happening, certainly too young to put it into the greater contextualization of what Navarre stood for, what their parents stood for, what human rights are, and does their relic size correlate to what their understanding was? I'm so curious. I want to see these younger kids.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought.
And are
But,
those the only two? Sorry. Are those the only two where we know the size of the rebellion relic, like compared to one another? I don't remember that.
Because we know that Zayden's goes all the way, like from his wrist all the way up to his neck.
Mm-hmm.
And Garrick's doesn't come as high up on his neck. So I assume they're all starting down at the wrist, which also is interesting because you can cover your lower arm pretty easily with a long sleeve shirt. It's harder to cover your neck. So there's like this other element there of his relic actually does need to be revealed to the world for the most part. He doesn't have a choice in that. Whereas someone who might have a much smaller relic could pretty easily, hide that. And I wonder if there's like an element of this relic revealing your true allegiance or not.
Yeah, like the larger the relic, the larger the threat to the system.
Or was Coda was he ranking his future army? And kind of selecting, Zayden's going to be the leader, and Garrick has sort of taken on the role of his number 2.
Second in command.
Yes.
Yeah.
I really like the idea that they're a ranked army for Coda, but that's because I really like the idea that Coda's in charge of all of this. It's like that just seems like a great reveal to be coming. It makes me so happy.
In a way, if that's what's happening, it's reinforcing the idea of hierarchy and distinct hierarchy and following a hierarchy. Certainly we see that within Navarre, that is enabling them to keep this somewhat oppressive regime in place because everyone is forced to respect hierarchy, especially within the military. I mean, we don't get a whole lot of insight into what life is like outside, just for the person who's, living wherever, a farmer or, a seamstress, whatever. We don't get a lot of insight into what their life is like. But within the military, we know hierarchy is so strictly enforced. And
that hierarchy and the marking, it's a marked othering, right? I mean, so back to history, like it's like the Jewish star, right? It is people that are going to wear their religious attire. I can't think of the right name that marks them as possibly a persecuted group, or the color of your skin that you can't hide. And I know that you guys are super active on the resistance side because once somebody is marked and othered, they need sympathizers, right? And I want to kick this back to you guys and to talk about that. But from a Rebecca Yarros perspective, I think she is setting up that there needs to be supporters and sympathizers outside of the marked ones in order for a movement to happen, in order for change to occur. That it can't just be those kids.
Yeah. There's only 107. There's not even 107 anymore.
Right. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
Because there's, that's the resistance side of it to me. Because in my mind, resistance is more like working within the system to work against it, I guess. And so, you need the marked ones are already outside of the system. They've been marked as, already the rebellion. So you need the cooperation of people that can work within the system and don't have that immediate distrust from the authority. You need that allyship so that the people that are already excluded from the system can still have some influence there. And so, yeah, I think that that's always going to be really important. Every rebellion needs allies within the system they're trying to oppose.
Yeah. And I wonder, again, I'm very curious. So our oldest child is 20. Hold on. Let me math. 23?
23.
23. Did she just turn 20? Yes, she's 23. Okay. So our oldest child is 23. Our youngest is currently 11. And obviously, over the course of our lifetimes, we have evolved on many topics, and how our oldest was raised is very different than how our youngest is being raised, just because times are different, our thoughts are different. It's just, you grow, you evolve. So I can see so much difference in our 11-year-old versus our oldest when she was 11. And I'm very curious how these younger children who really are not going to have memories of being raised by their biological parents, who've been fostered out primarily to people who have been loyal to Navarre, what their experience is going to be, because they have something that marks them and they can't ever get rid of it. It is it is their history, it is their tradition, and yet they probably are growing up in an environment where they're being told that this part of them, who they were, was not valid, was dangerous, was, the idea that they're going to have fostered in them this idea of self-hatred because of what their parents did and because they cannot be separated from what their parents did due to the relic. And I wonder how that is going to play out for them. And when I think, we know that this book 4 and 5 are going to cover Violet's last year. So it's going to be, we're just going to see 3 years of time through the course of this series. And at the end of this, I'm expecting there's going to be some fairly substantial systematic changes in Navarre, in Pormiel, in the continent, in their relationship with people outside of Navarre, whether they're allies or not, in the Empyrean, the relationship to the Irids. We're going to see change. We're going to see a lot of change. And how much of that change is necessary for these young kids who are going to be growing up to actually not grow up with this deeply conflicting inner monologue. Anyway, yeah, that's where I think about these kids a lot.
That's so interesting. And will we even get those answers? Because to your point, if it's only going to cover the next few years, or will we get a time jump and see, how the world ends up and their
An epilogue?
Yeah.
I would love that.
Do you think the rebellion relics could be reversed? So if Coda died, would the rebellion relic potentially disappear? We don't really know what happens to your dragon relic if your dragon dies, because if your dragon dies, you die.
Right. And then for the marked ones who are younger and don't have a dragon yet, would they die as well?
If it is a magical bond. Now, I think that our theory is that there is a magical tie between them. That's all a bond is. And it's not the same as the kind of magical tie you have to your bonded dragon that you ride. It's magic. It's a different kind of magic. And I don't think that there's a interconnectedness of the life force the way there is with your bonded dragon. But what would happen if this tie is there and then the source of the other end of that tie, if it's a rope that's tying two things together and then the other end of that rope gets cut off, what happens?
I mean, I would think that they lose that extra signet at the very least, right? Because the dragon is charging that additional power, right?
Well, this is something that we also have a theory on. We think the signet belongs to the rider. It is a rider's ability. The nature of the signet is informed by the dragon that they are bonded to and by their own, who they are at their core and their deepest needs. But the ability itself is owned by the rider. So for instance, when Andarna breaks the bond with Violet, we see that Violet can still dreamwalk. When Terran has no magic, we see that Violet can still use her signet. When they're in Umbriel, Violet can still use her lightning signet, even though she's clearly not using magic that's coming from Terran because he has no magic at that point in time. So we think that the signet kind of like sits with the writer, and it can be, you can plug that signet into any outlet of power, whether it's from, like hypothetically, I don't think we'll see this happen. If a dragon rider had a signet and then bonded a griffin, they could use griffin power to provide magic to their signet. Now, I don't know if the griffin could provide enough magic to like fully power that signet, but especially if it was something like Dane, where he's reading memories, which kind of feels more in line with a griffin signet or a griffin gift, because it's like mind work or yeah. Anyway,
The idea of writers finding other sources of power that are not going to turn them venom, right? Because that's what drives them to turn venom is they need more power, and that's the source of it. But if they can find other alternative sources of power that don't have that same trade-off, that's a really interesting theory.
Well, that takes us into the area of the power of runes and making magic available to everyone.
democratizing access to magic.
Yeah, so I have a whole theory that I've tried to explain to every 4 times, so we're not gonna get into it. But essentially what it comes down to is I think the right runes on the ward stone can actually power the venom as well, ambiently.
And so instead of creating, we envision the wards as essentially a dome. And so I'm going to do my best to explain this, and it's not going to be 100% perfect. But if that dome, instead of blocking magic, was just making magic available, then you wouldn't need to draw from the earth. Just like the mage lights are powered by ambient magic, that ambient magic isn't enough to, satisfy a venom. We see that. But if you could increase the amount of ambient magic by having the ward stones like share magic instead of block magic, then could venom just have magic, and then you would have access to magic that wasn't tied to bonding a magical creature. It wasn't tied to pulling directly from the earth. It was just available.
And then what would happen to the society if it was democratized, right? And there weren't battles over who has access to magic, and it's not a resource constraint thing.
Limited resource anymore.
Then what would that do to the resistance and the rebellion? Um, I think there is a critical factor when we think about resistant rebellion revolts, that there is this scarce resource aspect that is in who gets magical powers, who is able to bond dragons, that creates a power structure that's outside of the government hierarchical structure that leads to a constant conflict that is just destabilizing to all of Navarre and the continent.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think we all know that finding sustainable sources of energy in pretty much any scenario is going to be a benefit to people, and it's going to take power away from authority figures that benefit very heavily from controlling those sources and making them finite and keeping you enslaved to, their whim to get access to it. So, that's another, large theme that definitely connects to our universe as well.
Absolutely. And especially because Rebecca Yarros has said that she conceptualized this entire series because of her anger over the kind of whitewashing of history, and particularly the removal of discussion of slavery in textbooks, particularly in the South, in U.S. in the South, which kind of was the origin of that. I don't want to say it was the origin in the U.S. because it did happen in the U.S. well before that, but they were the ones that held on to it the longest and continue to hold on to it. We discussed that, we lived in Mississippi for 10 years, so our children were educated in Mississippi for a decade. It was eye-opening, and it really makes me question if slavery was really about controlling. It was about the ability to become rich off someone else's labor because you were able to keep those people oppressed. It was about power. It was about money. And we know that it took a lot to officially end slavery. And then even after that, it was only ended in name in many ways, because we had such a long period where the the government still supported, local governments still supported systems that kept people oppressed and
Yeah.
still benefited one group at the expense of another group. And a huge part of that system was keeping different groups separated.
I would say for people outside the U.S. that aren't having U.S. history, a brief after the Civil War, we moved from slavery to sharecropping, where people were working land that they couldn't really afford to work, to prison labor, to segregation, and it wasn't until the '60s that in the U.S. segregation was outlawed. So we are only 60 some years, not even 60 some years from when separation of races was legal in the south of the US, which does lead me into a question for you guys. As people that are showing up as supporters, as protesters for people that are essentially marked others by their culture or by their skin, how does the othering in Fourth Wing resonate with your rationales for showing up for other people?
Well, I guess it's similar to how Violet, who's raised as a scribe and raised to question the information in front of her, feels when the book starts. She sees the rebellion relics as the others and as sort of the bad guys. And her position changes very quickly as she learns more about them and as she understands what information is being intentionally withheld. And she starts to question the narrative that she's been taught her entire life. And for me, I feel that I was given that same opportunity, right? Whether I learned it from my own family or I learned it in school, in college, through books I read, through just experiences I had, that I feel compelled to question the injustices that I see in our country. And as somebody who has been fortunate to be raised with a position of privilege in many ways, I have the ability to help people, and it shouldn't be on the marginalized communities to stand up for themselves necessarily.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely reading, like Rachel said, definitely played a big part in this of, growing up the way that I did, again, in a privileged community. I had access to a good education. I had all of these resources, and it wasn't until maybe when I was in college and later on that I had to start really unlearning a lot of the things that I learned in school. Again, I went to school outside of Philadelphia, like good school districts and everything. I wasn't necessarily on guard already. I just assumed, this is a good education. I can trust what I'm being taught. And compared to, I think, a lot of other places in the country, that might be more the case, but I still learned so much outside of that system, reading books on my own that were not part of a curriculum, seeing other sources of information, and getting a much more well-rounded view of not only the history in our country, but of what's happening right now. Just, again, knowledge is power. So just getting the knowledge and getting the full picture and being able to come to my own conclusions from that really changed how I interact with the world. I'm definitely prone to be very distrustful of an official narrative at this point. And so if somebody tells me that I should not support a certain group of people or not, or that a certain group of people is not deserving of the things that I believe every human being is deserving of, I'm not just going to fall in line with that anymore. And so I definitely feel like I have just an obligation to stand up, and if I have the ability to be more aggressive about that because of the place of privilege that I'm coming from, I can be louder and potentially face less consequences for that. I'm really happy to do that, and I definitely just feel like I want to be that ally that, like I said earlier, that I think every resistance movement needs to have, right? I can just inherently who I am as a person, I live within the kind of established system, right? Like the system is more built for me than it is for a lot of other groups of people. So I can kind of use that to my advantage to speak and try to elevate their voices. So that's a long-winded way to say
Yeah.
that I just I see what's going on, and nobody is getting the full picture from the established narrative coming from either the government or mainstream news sources typically. And so having the full story and coming to my own conclusions has kind of just forced me into this path of resistance and rebellion.
I find myself getting a little bit emotional right now thinking about it, because I'm also thinking about the character Dane and how I personally, in our world, feel very strongly and often feel very angry about the people that don't see eye to eye with me and who I feel are treating others poorly. And I think the character of Dane is very interesting for that perspective, because he was raised so strongly to fall in line with Navarre and the narrative that he was taught. And it took so much to change his mind. And I think his character arc is very interesting because it can give us hope that with the right information in front of them, anybody can change their mind. And it's never too late to change your mind, even if it takes literally seeing the venom for yourself.
And it's okay to change your mind. It's not a bad thing to be presented with new information and to change your perspective on something. That's called learning, and it's a good thing. And I feel like, there's a lot of messaging out there that makes it seem like it's a bad thing to change what you might have held really strongly to believe in the past. And, I think a lot of readers we're lifelong learners, right? And so learning is always going to be a positive for me. And I welcome anybody who wants to change their mind.
I think Dane is such a strong character to have in the story because of he is the person who's changing his mind. Like he is the arc of learning. And if a resistance movement can't welcome in people who are late to the party, it can't grow, right?
Mhm.
Like it has to allow people who have not seen it to join it because the resistance has to expand in order to be successful. And there's a lot of challenges in the real world and a lot of challenges for Dane with people that don't want to let him change his mind, don't want to let him learn, don't want to accept that he is a 20-year-old who is finally outside of his home and is finally learning what the real world is like. And to not be able to change your viewpoints in your 20s, particularly, is harsh. But whether you're 65 or 75 or even 80, learning and changing your mind, it has got to be part of a resistance movement because we have got, you have to convince people to come to your side. Kate, I think you almost perfectly planned the transition when you were talking about getting into the official narrative because the epigraph from chapter 18, I think it really plays into this concept of and learning when you have been taught something different or if you've been taught something's true.
So let me read that epigraph. There is nothing more sacred than the archives. Even temples can be rebuilt, but books cannot be rewritten. Colonel Daxton's Guide to Excelling in the Scribe Quadrant. I think this is so interesting. It's really holding this idea that knowledge is the ultimate, most important thing. But we also know that the archives are not preserving knowledge, they're preserving narrative. And throughout all of history, controlling a narrative has been a tool of tyranny. We see this in other ways too. It's not just the erasure of the venom from history, but it's like, for instance, in Iron Flame, we go into a Rider survival course and they're dropped into the middle of this forest. The infantry and the riders are given two separate maps. We are seeing that disinformation at play in this very small controlled setting. And even just this little bit of disinformation that it takes them forever to realize what's going on. And it causes real problems. It keeps the groups separate. And this is a theme I want to come back to as well about how keeping people separate is so important right now. Like this, the control of information in Basgayath, in Navarre. How do you see that as it relates to the rebellion of the older generation, the resistance and the revolution of our current generation?
So I think you said it perfectly. I mean, controlling the narrative really is textbook authoritarianism. If you control the information that people have access to, then you control the conclusions that they come to with that information. So like an easy example of this that I think about a lot is the saying, like, blood is thicker than water. That's what the most common version of that phrase is, and people use it to justify, having to stick with your family even if they treat you badly, because family is more important than anything else, regardless of how they might treat you. But the full saying is actually, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, which has the opposite meaning, that, bonds are stronger when forged through shared experiences or loyalty and friendship, rather than just relying on something like a family tie. And so that, to me, is like the perfect example of, if you hide certain pieces of information, the entire meaning and conclusion that you come to is different. And so it's just such an easy way to control a population, that you give them information, they can think that they know what's going on, they can think that they are coming to their own conclusions, but it's just the conclusion that you've specifically crafted for them by cherry picking and omitting very key pieces of the story. So it's harder to see what's missing when it seems like you're being presented with a full narrative. So that's why there's nothing more powerful than the archives, because what is or isn't in there is just going to shape every perception of everyone around them. If you give people all of the information and actually allow them to come to their own conclusions, then you completely lose control of the narrative.
And it's so interesting. The concept of scribes are so interesting to me, and how they're taught to kind of poke holes in the information that they have in front of them. It's sort of like their version of lawyers, and maybe, I'm sure, medical school, I'm sure you're taught that as well, right? To think about it from your own perspective. And for Violet and Jasenia, knowing that information is missing and intentionally hidden is just as damning as having those facts in front of them. So that's why it was a red flag to both of them that the Fables of Barons was missing, and that, hey, why is it missing? Who made it go missing? Who can we not trust now? And they know from looking at patterns that they need to work quietly. So essentially, removing that information rather than letting people figure it out for themselves, removing that information ended up birthing the resistance movement, just as they started searching for that information.
And it's so interesting, too, that the archives are so tightly controlled. So if you consider the archives to be what would maybe be the equivalent of a library, in the US, most places have a local public library, and you can walk in there and you can have access to any book on the shelf. There may be some libraries that do have restricted sections, primarily because the value of the text book, it's old, it's rare, it's whatever, and you have to have special handling of a manuscript like that. But, certainly dating myself here, but when you had to do your first report in elementary school, you went into the library before the internet was a thing, and you had textbooks, you had encyclopedias, and you sat there and you pulled multiple encyclopedias and multiple books that were written about the topic of interest to you. So you were writing a report about whales or whatever, so you pulled 3 different encyclopedias and looked up whales, but then you also got all of these other books that were specific to whales. And you looked at all of that, and then you wrote your report, and you identified what's common across all of these, what's not, what stands out because it's different and unique. But the archives in Navarre are so tightly controlled. You don't get to just have access to everything. The scribes don't even get to just have access to everything. You have to reach certain ranks to have access to restricted texts. And those texts are not necessarily restricted because of the age, because we know that they're always copying these books and updating them and making new versions of historic texts. And those are still, they're actively redacting as they're making these updates. And so if you were just the average person, again, the average citizen of Navarre who's not tied to the military, you may not even have any access whatsoever to the archives. And if you did, whatever you went in to access, you would have to know the specific question to ask. You didn't just have access to information. You had only what you could conceive to ask, and then only what they would allow you to see.
You just completely terrified me, because what if your scribe's name is Claude?
Oh.
because
Easily.
that's what we're doing with AI, right? I mean, Claude decides what you see. Claude decides what you're getting. People in the math behind the chatbots are going to filter and tell you whether or not a book is available, or whether or not that passage can be read, or whether or not it's restricted.
If
So
it's even relevant.
and first of all, books can be rewritten, but even if books couldn't be rewritten, books can disappear, right? And Rachel, back to your point with the fables of the Baron, books can go away. I mean, and they can be rewritten. And Rebecca Yarros's point of 3 generations, it's very interesting. We have 4 daughters, so it's very interesting for them to have no concept of women not being able to get credit cards, no concept of women not being half of college students, being half of medical school students, and for nurses to have the ability to become nurse practitioners and have practices. They just have no reference for it, and no one's teaching them that history particularly. So it just disappears from their mind, it disappears from their decision making. So whether it's AI or just history or the scribe in the archive, it's really easy to make information disappear to control a narrative, because if you don't have firsthand experience with it, you just paint with a different brush.
And I think that goes along with Rebecca Yarros had said in Onyx, Violet is left these 6 books, and we get quotes from 3 of them as epigraphs or discussed in the course of the story. And Rebecca Yarros said, oh yeah, Violet has read the other 3, and you don't see them because she doesn't think it's important. We're only attentive to what we think is important. But doesn't Violet know her father enough to know that he wouldn't have written it if he didn't think it was important? So if she doesn't think it's important, but he did, what's missing? What's missing that he thought it was important enough to write it down, that it was information that didn't exist, that he thought needed to be recorded, and specifically recorded and left for her in these protected journals, but she's not thinking it's important.
Well,
which is wild to me.
That gets us into theory territory, because I have some thoughts there, and I think that could tie into some of the memories that she has had potentially wiped intentionally to protect some of the information, or potentially protect some of the other characters.
Well, we can delve into some theories. We've been
known to theorize about things once or twice.
We've been, on heavy topics for a minute, so we can dig in.
I mean, I don't know how prepared I am to speak to it on a detailed level, but that's something that stands out to me, that she just thinks that 3 books are not important enough to include in the books right now. I think that they're definitely going to come back. And to your point, whether it's because she uncovers some more information that she then realizes that they're relevant, or she's been intentionally hiding that information because she doesn't want somebody who would be a danger with that information to have access to it. Perhaps somebody who can read minds.
I mean, it is a, we have strong theories about the consent aspect of Violet having her memories erased. And I very much feel like Rebecca Yarros would have consent issues with it, but that doesn't mean she wouldn't write it. It just means she would have consent issues with it that will come out in the plot. But this concept that Violet is hiding things is essentially, in a espionage type level with the resistance, right? Because she is part of the establishment. She has a relationship with the king. She dated the prince. Her mother is very establishment, and she is joined the resistance. She's not even a sympathizer, right? Like she is now a leader of the resistance, but still has these ties to the establishment. And how does that tie into, rebellion versus revolution? We don't get any kind of what I would consider revolution vibes from Violet. Like, she doesn't want to completely overthrow anyone. She just wants people treated well, right? Like, she's not currently planning to kill King Tari, right? Despite the fact that he's very unwise. But that was the best thing in a Rebecca Yarros interview at any time, when she got asked why she called him King Tari the Wise, and she said because it was ironic.
I had a thought thinking about how Violet, you said she doesn't have those revolutionary tendencies so much. I feel like it's just a matter of time, because I'm finding myself, I feel kind of similar, for a long time I felt very similarly to Violet, of I just want things to change and people to be treated fairly. I just want this shift in in how some things operate, right? But I wasn't thinking at the scale of everything needs to burn to the ground for something better to rise up from the ashes. But the longer I think that you try to work within the system, at least from my experience, the more you get pushed into the revolutionary realm, because it is really, really hard to work within the system, especially if the system is not broken, but is actually working exactly how it's designed to operate. And that's why everything is happening the way that it is. Coming to that kind of conclusion, maybe Violet will get there, of realizing that this is not a system that can be fixed. It's a system that is not broken, and therefore, to change anything, you need to tear it down.
This gets at what I was just trying to think about. At the end of Fourth Wing, when we get to, the big reveal about Brennan and he's like, welcome to the revolution. One of the things that really distinguishes a rebellion or even resistance from a revolution is that with a revolution, you are aiming towards something completely different. And in order to do that, you have to have a vision of what that would be. And you have to unite people around that vision. And one of the things I'm hoping we're going to see in book 4, and I'm sure we'll see it by book 5, is someone who's cast a clear vision of what the future could be and what we want to achieve, how we want things to change. Because right now, it kind of feels like a little disjointed. Like, do we want to expand the wards into Poromil? Do we want to be able to supply venom fighting weapons to Poromil? Do we want to just completely destroy the venom, even though we thought we had destroyed them before and then they came back? And were they ever actually destroyed? Because we don't think they ever were, like,
Or
there's
like go the whole way to where venom aren't even the enemy.
Right. Are venom not even the enemy? If we got to the bottom of it, would we discover venom are not even truly an enemy? They were never the bad guys to begin with. We've just pushed them so far that now this is their only option. Like, but there's not yet a clearly articulated, this is what we want to see. I think each person who we've seen who's participating, they feel strongly that people should be treated better. They feel, they don't want people to be taken advantage of. They don't want people to be left high and dry. The fact that these poor griffins are out there trying to fight the venom, for 700 years on their own. Like, that's not the way it should be. That's not fair. That's not equitable. But we haven't really cast a vision of like, what would it take for us to actually have a system that is equitable?
Well, and we have, I wouldn't really call it a theory, but we have a fanfic um on, on our Patreon that actually looks at the venom as originally enslaved. If we extrapolate Rebecca Yarros' comment of, I started writing this because of the erasure of slavery from history. Well, what would, if we totally extrapolated that comment and we looked at the venom as, what if the original conflict was a slave revolt? How would that change this entire narrative if 500 years ago, the reason you're fighting with venom is because it was a slave revolt and they were an absolute oppressed people that were trying to gain freedom? And then what does that mean for possible outcomes when history is revealed? Could you actually find a way to find a peace treaty, stop the fight? What if they originally began to draw from the earth because they were a marginalized population that was being enslaved? And if that is the history of Navarre that's been erased, how does that affect the resolution to the books?
Wow.
So much to think about. Oh my God.
Well, I want to go back to your theory on the wards as a globe and what they're keeping in and what they're keeping out, because I think that could also tie into thinking about what this better world could look like, right? So, and maybe you can help me, because I know you guys have read the books a million times too, so you might be able to help me fill in the gaps. But venom can pull within them, can't they? Like, we've watched them pull them with. We've watched them.
Yes. Jack turned within the wards.
Yes,
So,
and, and Jack drained all of the magic inside his cell.
Right. And so Xaden turned within the wards, right? And
well, the wards were down when Xaden
they
turned.
were down. Okay. But Jack did. And the Griffins, when the wards were back fully powered, the Griffin Riders could not use their signets until they altered the wards. So why were they created in the first place? This obviously all ties into the Empyrean and how this whole system got set up, right? Like, why were they created in the first place? Was it actually to keep out venom? Because it doesn't seem like it.
Well,
And-
I think
And it's preventing the Griffin Riders from using their powers there. So I wonder almost if it's keeping the magic in for the Dragon Riders or somehow powering the dragons. And by tearing down the wards, because we know that Violet will tear down the wards for love. If tearing down the wards will actually be the cure to venomism, because it opens up, it goes back to that idea of democratizing magic for everyone.
I mean, we know venom existed before the wards existed. So, like, you know, the wards were formed as a response to the venom. That's why humans and dragons and humans and griffins bonded to begin with, was as a response to whatever was happening with the venom. But we really don't know enough about what was happening. And when we were just talking about like the control of information, the more I think about this, yes, Navarre is controlling information, but you know who's the most controlling of information? The freaking Empyrean.
Yes.
They are controlling so much. And even within these, you know, we see Sigil keep Xaden's second signet secret from her mate. And we know that the mate bond is the most intimate, interconnected type of magical tie that exists for dragons. So is it any surprise that these dragons are keeping secrets from their bonded riders? Would it be any surprise? Like, if they can keep secrets even within this most intimate and interconnected, interdependent magical tie, they can keep secrets from their riders. They can keep secrets from other dragons in their den. They can keep secrets from the Empyrean. The Empyrean can keep, like, there's got to be so much secret keeping. These are not dumb animals. These are highly intelligent, long-lived, extremely magical creatures. They know things, and they are purposely keeping things a secret from the humans and from each other, from the Do you ever wonder, like, when the dragons and the griffins are talking, like, what do they say to each other that the humans aren't privy to? Like,
Can we go back to the runes for a sec? Because it's
we're
so excited about getting back to the runes. Because the runes on the word stones are like this logic structure. Because they destroyed a rune, and that meant that the griffins could do their mind work.
Or they changed the rune, right? They didn't wipe it off. They put a new one.
He couldn't figure out how to change it. He just kind of like futzed with it. So like it went away, right? So
And magic.
So that rune essentially had to say, and not griffin magic, and not channeled from a griffin, right? So but the wards in Orisha didn't have whatever that was that said, and not griffins. So Navarre chose to add runes that kept other people's magic out. And I think that's part of where Lyra was talking about, like, she thought everyone should have access under the wards, and it didn't happen. And then I forgot the guy's name that lied about it in his journal on how to actually rebuild it so that no one else could ever figure it out. But then Poromiral had a
luminary.
So they could have made theirs and left venom in, or, you know, kept dragons out. Like, I mean, so like in theory, you could say, and dragon magic doesn't work here, but venom magic does. You know, there would be ways to like make either providence or states where people lived, but also the fact that the ward stone can be imbued, and Xaden used it in the Isles.
The alloy,
Mm-hmm.
was used in the Isles. Theoretically, that means venom could invade the Isles if they had enough.
alloy.
Well, I think that they already have. I think there's a reason that Hedotus is just all drainstone.
And it's pale. Everything about it is pale.
And with purple eyes.
Yes, the purple eyes.
Red plus blue equals purple.
Color logic.
Just saying color logic, yes. All right.
But I do think that that's you know, because Rebecca Yarros has also said, would you lay down your sword to become someone else's shield, is a recurring theme. When we think about the wards, functionally the wards are supposed to act as a shield, right? Even Mira's signet is supposed to be a shield. But in this case, I think the wards are the sword. They are the act of aggression. They are the tool that is used to harm others. And would you sacrifice that so that everyone could have equal access to safety? Because the wards are not about safety. They're about othering, which goes back to our original discussion.
And this comes full circle to the resistance, when when we see people become somebody else's shield and suffer from becoming someone else's shield, we tend to see movement enact, right? When the group that is more privileged is the group that is experiencing negative consequences from being somebody else's shield, we see big movements. I mean, we have seen radical shifts in the US after what happened at Minnesota, right? And not nearly as much as many people want, but a big change in narrative because a couple people stood up and were shields for other people, and that actually cost them their life being that shield, right? But that is like essentially the question that Rebecca Yarros is asking, and who in Navarre is willing to be somebody else's shield. And I find it very interesting to walk the path and say, is this about those that have rebellion relics? Is this about the Venom? What really is the Venom backstory? Are they really the bad guys? Or are they, or are they oppressed and fighting back? Right. So we know that right now there's a lot of swords and not a lot of shields. And I think book 4 and book 5 are going to have a lot of people being shields. And that's going to, in Rebecca Yarros style, tear out our heart because they're not all the shields are going to survive.
Like Arik, who's now the Venom brother, who turned on purpose because this is what he was doing. His position is so privileged, and he just laid down his sword to become a shield by doing the very thing that you would never expect of him to do. But whatever it is, he saw that this was necessary, and he's doing this. And Dane, and here's the thing, every time you do this, there's a cost. Your decision to lay down your sword to become a shield, your decision to participate in resistance always comes at a cost. And we see this with Dane. He used his signet to be Violet's shield in the, in Iron Flame when he read her memories, and then ended up, protecting her and taking out Barish. And that came at a cost. It was a big cost. He now, is so cut off from his family. We don't know anything about his mom. We don't know if she's still alive. We don't know if he ever had a relationship with her. But given the fact that she's never mentioned, I'm going to assume that she's not an active part of his life. So his only parent, he's now cut off from. And that was a cost he was willing to pay. And so a lot of this comes back to what cost are you willing to pay to do the right thing too? And that's something that if you, that goes back to this whole, are you willing to lay down your sword to be someone else's shield? And
yeah, and again, I really do feel like it's more of a fanfic than a theory, but it is very interesting to think that the Venom aren't the bad guys. And if Arik knew the Venom aren't the bad guys, to align himself with them with his status in order to give them a chance to end the fighting would just be an incredible story. I don't really know that I believe that that's true, but that story arc would be amazing. I do really believe he's the Venom brother. But the concept of taking U.S. history and looking at the privileged people that went to the South during the segregation movement and
the Freedom Riders, and
in order to make that movement possible, because they had the privilege to make that movement possible and the group themselves could not have done it without assistance, to think that Arik might be that person that makes the Venom movement a peaceful possibility is very interesting in this thinking of resistance and rebellion, because one of the ways you change revolution to rebellion is to bring the outside group into the inside group with a leader that can represent across and can actually negotiate that greater alliance.
Which is why Violet, being the Duchess of Tyrandor and being in the position of control, is such a great setup for the rest of the series, because she is a pivotal bridge. Everyone's like, why did Xaden marry Violet if Bodhi could have stepped up? Well, because Bodhi could never do what Violet can do. Violet's skill in creating allies, her skill in bringing people together, in allowing, hearing everyone, and then finding the common threads and finding the truth, and really focusing, not all the time, because sometimes she's really girl, why are you not paying attention? But for the most part, as a person, she has this goal of uniting in a way that Bodhi, that's just not him. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is a special Violet's resume, special skills.
If you're asking why the guy based upon birth should be in charge instead of the brilliant fucking woman, I need you to just sit with that for a minute.
Take several seats.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Violet and Arik's story continue, because I agree. again, getting emotional just thinking about Arik stepping up and really sacrificing himself for the greater good, and with his signet, seeing the outcome.
His statement that he would dismantle the family business before he joined it, we're going to see a dismantling of his family business.
And
For sure.
we're gonna have to go back and look at when he actually said that, because was he manifesting when he said that?
Yes. 100. Yes.
Because was that a sentiment or a
No.
prediction?
He was
said-
already manifesting.
Yeah, he said that in the aisles. He said that,
Yeah.
right? With
I-
Corden? Is that who he was with?
Were they in Hedoitus? And well, that's when he made the comment that his brother would be king, and a terrible one. But yeah, he was definitely, I mean, had to be after chapter 20, and we know for sure he knew a lot by chapter 20.
I definitely read that as a sentiment,
Mm-mm.
but I wonder if that was a prediction of the future, a statement of fact.
Yes.
I thought it was a statement, a fact. Yeah.
100%. Kate, what's your take?
I agree. I mean, at that point, I think that's the only conclusion that I came to. Also because I just really want it to be true.
Yes. But I do think it's like the only way that we're going to get to this new reality. Are the existing systems can't stand. They can't remain the systems. They're too corrupted to make a way for an equitable future. They have to be replaced. But I want to circle back to one of the things that we were hitting on, because I think that the Oryx decision to turn, and even Xaden's decision at the end of Onyx, where he's like, you know what, I'm going to give up being by Violet's side, which is what he really wants, to protect Sigil. He ultimately knows that when he drew again at the end of Onyx, that it would take him fully through this transition. He'd no longer be an initiate. He's an ASIM now. As an ASIM, he is physically unable to resist the call of his sage Maven. And he knew this, and he sacrificed what he wanted for what he felt was the greater good. But what it's going to do is increase his proximity to the Venin. Arik turning, becoming part of the Venin network, where we know that they're all traceable to each other, have some ability to share information with each other, increases his proximity. Basgaeth, Navarre as a whole, is really invested in keeping people separate. So going back to the epigraphs, in chapter 7, we get this epigraph that says, in the best interest of preserving peace within Navarre, no more than 3 cadets carrying rebellion relics may be assigned to any squad of any quadrant. Addendum 5.2, Basgaeth War College Code of Conduct. And then it says, in addition to last year's changes, marked ones assembling in groups of 3 or more will now be considered an act of seditious conspiracy and is hereby a capital offense. Addendum 3.5, Basgaeth War College Code of Conduct. So we see that the Basgaeth is trying to keep the marked ones from assembling in any significant way, but also, like, they also keep riders very separate from the other quadrants. We're with Violet in the riders quadrants. We really have no idea what's going on in the other quadrants. And even when we get to the places where we start to see cross-quadrant cooperation, like RSC, these people are so busy trying to stay alive that they're not really trying to build relationships, even though that's purportedly the purpose of this class. But Navarre is really about keeping its citizens very segregated from everyone else. They've cut off all of their relationships, all of their diplomatic communications. It's like illegal to cross the border. They're really trying to create these insular groups. And even within their isolated insular nation, within that, the people who have the most power, arguably the people bonded to the dragons, are even kept even more insular, and that's reinforced in everything that they learn at Basgaeth, and everything about the way the military operates is so hierarchical to keep people separated and insular. And keeping these kind of strict separations between groups, whether it's based on the quadrant that you're in, whether you're bonded to a dragon or a griffin, whether you're bonded to a magical creature at all, whether you're from one nation or the other, carrying over into kind of today, like what your race is, your socioeconomic status, your religion. Keeping groups isolated is absolutely something that has been used throughout time, again, to control narratives, to control populations, and for the small people in power at the top to stay in power, and to profit from, because I don't think you can separate any of this from money, to profit from the strict separations between these groups. So how do you see like what's happening in Navarre relating to what's going on in our kind of our modern world and the acts of resistance and revolution that are occurring in our world?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's the best way to control a large group of people is to keep them divided, right? Not only does it minimize their ability to share knowledge, and again, we keep coming back to this idea of like when you don't have the full picture, when you don't have all the information, you cannot come to the right conclusions. So, keeping people dividing that information and making it harder to see the full picture and really understand what's actually going on. But also it allows the oppressor or the authority to needle these very insignificant differences between people and make that the whole focus, right? So rather than seeing all the many ways that you might be similar to another group, you're only focusing on the small, again, often very meaningless ways that you are different. They might be more significant ways that you're different, but they're not a negative, right? But you are only getting information from the authority, so they are able to just get you to focus so myopically on that difference, and that allows them to control whether you see that person as an enemy, whether you see that person as better than you. It allows them to fully control how you interact between those groups, right? And so it's just, again, it's controlling the narrative, it's controlling the spread of information, it's just, making the population smaller because it's easier to control different smaller groups of people than one large unified group of people. And so, yeah, it's very tied to what's going on in so many different parts of the world right now, of just it's never going to benefit the population to be divided. It's only going to benefit the oppressor. And that's just always going to be the case. And in Bezgaeth, again, the ways that the resistance is able to move forward and gain momentum is by crossing those boundaries. Violet learning from the scribes and her connection there, and crossing the boundary and becoming entwined with the marked ones, like the major steps and the progress that they're able to make is by shutting those boundaries down and seeing the full picture.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a great example of how the right to assemble is not right in Navarre, right? And that in the Riders Quadrant, you're only safe to assemble with your squad, with your group, because somebody from another one could kill you. So you're not safe to assemble with them unless you really, really trust them. And how are you ever going to really trust them when you don't get to know them because you've been kept apart, right? So as people who show up at protests and show up and assemble, how does that getting together affect the ability to control a narrative?
Go ahead, Rachel.
I mean, I think that the idea of controlling a narrative, I'm going to separate that from the protests, because for me, protests are a way of giving people hope. I don't think that protests are going to change the minds of people who need their minds changed. I think it's giving hope to the people who feel like we need to give them a voice. But for controlling the narrative and keeping people separate, something that I think about a lot is the tough on crime narrative that candidates in the United States have run on for decades. And they've created this idea, feeding on people's fear, that crime is rising year after year, when statistically, data shows that it's actually declining year after year. And it's the same thing that's happening in Navarre when they're keeping people separate, creating poor meal, creating the war with poor meal that does not need to exist. And it's distracting from the real issues. And to Kate's point and your point, preventing people from unifying against the actual oppressor and actual, evil forces happening.
Yeah, no, there's the site that's changed hands 11 years and 11 times and 400 some years. And
Resin.
I really believe that is just, they start the battle there every time they need a distraction. And then when they don't need a distraction, they hand it back over to poor Mill because they know they're going to need a distraction someday.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and it's so, I think the first time we really see Violet change her mind about the marked ones, and it's a little change, is when she's sitting in the tree listening to Xaden talk to all of the marked ones. And it's really at the beginning of Fourth Wing, she's trying to collect some poison, right? And so she's out doing something she knows she's not supposed to be doing. And then she overhears this and she realizes, oh my gosh, these are just people who are struggling through the same thing with the added pressure of being ostracized by most of the other people in this quadrant over something they had nothing to do with, over something that's beyond their control. But they're just like me. And it's like that proximity, the breaking down of the separation, is what starts to change her mind. Our children went to school in Mississippi, and even though segregation had officially ended, you could certainly identify ways in which legal segregation was continuing. And even, I would say even beyond that, there was a saying that the most segregated place in Mississippi was the church pew, that, you had these white churches and black churches. And while I completely respect the right of any group, but especially a marginalized group, to create a community that feels safe for them because it does exclude people who have traditionally harmed them or historically harmed them. The fact that, you saw this legal segregation continuing. Schools were another place where it was really, really, particularly private schools where, 95% plus of the student and teacher/administrator population was white, purposely excluding. And these schools all started when segregation legally ended. They just went and started legal versions with private schools. But we know that for white children to grow up in an environment that is racially diverse, where they are not, the predominant race, is totally life-changing for the way that they go about their adult life compared to white students who grow up in a school that is predominantly white. Because we know that proximity, and this is why, what's that saying about travel? Travel is the biggest way to change your mind. Because proximity, breaking down the barriers and the separations that are often artificial, is what changes people's minds, is what allows them to see others as the same as me.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that changed my mind on government healthcare was the 2 months I spent working in a government healthcare clinic in Chile, and seeing the way that they dealt with problems. If you had diabetes and you didn't come to your appointment, the nurses got in a car and came to you to find out what was wrong and why you met your appointment. If you didn't have electricity to store your insulin, they they ran electricity to your house and put a refrigerator in your house so that you could treat your diabetes. And they had such better outcomes than we have with chronic disease, and completely changed my entire view on the US healthcare system because I spent 2 months working in a different system. The ability to experience something that, has been almost demonized in a way, it can be very eye-opening, and that proximity piece is very real. And Navarre is doing everything possible to keep people not in proximity to manage that narrative.
Well, Rachel and Kate, this has been amazing. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And I would just want to give you an opportunity. When you're thinking now, what can we do as a bookish community, as people who love Fourth Wing and love what Rebecca Yarros is doing, and who want to be better citizens of our communities, our countries, and certainly our online spaces? What can we do to be part of this movement of resisting tyranny and fascism, and um, creating a more equitable future?
I mean, reading itself is resistance, I believe. Knowledge is power. So just never stop learning, never stop looking to broaden your horizons and learn something new every day. That's, the easiest thing you can do on a daily basis is just keep your mind open and be open to new ideas and learning new things. But also, it can feel overwhelming when you look at a problem that feels maybe even global or national at the least, to know how can I actually make an impact? And the best way that I've found to do that is look at your local community. That's where you can make a real difference on like in your everyday life. You can feel the impact of your actions when you're looking to build community, get to know your neighbors, join volunteer with local organizations, just like look at the local level. And I found that it is really helpful for me to feel like I can make a difference there because you can see the impact. It's hard to see the change that you are making at a national or a global scale by joining a local protest or volunteering for a nonprofit or something like that. There's a lot that you can do no matter what your goal is. And starting at that level is where I like to focus.
And I think also playing to it's kind of a choose your own journey, right? And playing to your own strengths and getting creative with what you personally excel at, what you're personally interested in, because it shouldn't feel overwhelming. Everybody has their own strengths and goals, and finding your niche in the revolution is, we all have to work together.
Yeah, I love that. And certainly one thing I'll add, join your school board if that's your niche, because the control of information and how we teach our children is what our future will be.
Or support your local library.
Support your local library is another one. And if you don't have a local library, because I know they don't exist everywhere in the world, but that just breaks my heart.
Get the library apps.
Library, yes, absolutely.
And build a little free library in your neighborhood.
I love those. Yes, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us what's going on with you and where we can find you in the bookish space.
Thank you so much for having us. Our podcast, Deep Trope Podcast, is deep diving Direbound by Sable Sorensen. You can find us on social media at Deep Trope Podcast and at deeptropepodcast.com. New episodes drop on Tuesdays. And if you love Fourth Wing and have not read Direbound yet, you will absolutely love this one. It's got everything you love. Bonding trials, a powerful FMC, and really being the resistance in an oppressive government. So I think you're going to love it.
Awesome.
We just saw them in person and it was great.
Yes.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. They were at Romantasy Con.
Yes, it was very fun. Well, that is it from us. So for everyone who's listening, thank you for sticking with us in this new format in the Romantasy Chaos Unmasked. I hope that it was fun for you, that you got to see a different side of things and go places that we don't normally get to go in our short form episodes. Leave us a comment, drop us an email, let us know what you thought. What did we miss? What do you want us to revisit? And remember, we love you. Stay out of the clouds, off the ice, and come back to us. We'll see you next time. Bye.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.